For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. I want to give you a hypothetical scenario that maybe you've experienced yourself in your line of work. You're the new person at a company, and you've obviously got a lot to prove, especially because this week, the boss is going to be around the office personally seeing how everything is going. You want to prove your worth, and maybe even get an increase in salary and notoriety, and show that your hire wasn't a mistake. So you decide to take the initiative to do something extra. You go above and beyond. Without anyone else knowing, and without getting permission from anyone else to do it, you decide, on your own, to do some things that you feel are going to help the company. You change some of the language in the presentations. You personally call up some clients to get some sales leads and help them out. You move around some of the papers to make it more organized. You get the idea. You're eager to help as a newbie, and you hope that your helpfulness will increase productivity and get you noticed by the boss. However, as it turns out, by doing all of this, you screwed everything up. You were trying to be helpful, and you made it that much worse, to the point where the company is now in trouble. And some of the calls you made, unbeknownst to you, were to people on the no-call list. So now, the company could be facing sanctions. Basically, even though you had good intentions, you messed everything up. You were not a help whatsoever. In fact, you were the furthest thing from a help possible. Speaking of help, if you want to help me out, we're trying to hit 60,000 subscribers and build the best football community on the platform to talk about all things NFL history all the time. So if you like that sort of stuff, and you like this studio set behind me right here, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss a single moment of the action when we do post a video on the channel. Thanks in advance for your support. Well, I bring that hypothetical scenario up because that's exactly what happened with one scout on the Kansas City Chiefs during this game right here. During opening day of the 1983 NFL season, a Chiefs scout decided, completely on his own, to take some initiative in order to help his team win. A Chiefs scout decided to prove his worth and help out the defensive side of the ball by doing something that he felt would give his team a massive advantage. However, in doing so, he screwed everything up, because as it turns out, what he did was completely illegal, and it ended up getting Pete Rozelle, the commissioner of the NFL, involved. Because this is the story behind Greg Mons, a Chiefs scout, the season opener between the Chiefs and the Seahawks, and a bizarre story of how the Chiefs may have cheated in order to beat their AFC West rival. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context to understand the importance of the game at hand, and how the game itself was going that led to this moment in the first place. It's September 4th, 1983. It's week 1 of a brand new NFL season, and we've got a battle on our hands over at Arrowhead Stadium between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Seattle Seahawks, two AFC West rivals, in what is, oddly enough, their first meeting since 1981, seeing as they did not meet at all during the strike-shortened 1982 season due to how the schedule played out with the canceled games and whatnot. Oddly enough, this is not the first time I've done a video on this game, as I talked about this game nearly 3 years ago in a previous video of mine, talking about a bizarre touchdown pass during the game involving a man who hadn't practiced the play in question and hadn't thrown a football in nearly a decade. So if you want to learn more about that, you can do so by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Still, it is important to win this game and get off to a good start, seeing as in the last full season in 1981, all but one of the playoff teams in the AFC started the season off with a 1-0 record. So you want to get on the right track and start the year off on the right foot. And sure enough, the Chiefs emerged from this one victorious, as in front of their home fans, they prevailed by a final score of 17-13, leading for just about the entirety of the contest. Now, the offense definitely played a part in why the Chiefs started the season off 1-0. They had no turnovers on the offensive side of the ball, playing an extremely clean game in that regard. Starting quarterback Bill Kenny showed glimpses of why he would make it to the Pro Bowl later in the year, as he finished the game throwing for 247 yards and no interceptions, and posting a passer rating of 94.1. He looked sharp. Kansas City dominated the time of possession, holding onto the ball for over 33 minutes. The Chiefs had quite a few big plays in the passing game, having multiple plays go for 40-plus yards. And the Chiefs had 365 yards of total offense, which was more than they had in any game during the 1982 season. In fact, in 1982, the Chiefs only had one game with over 300 yards of total offense, and they managed to accomplish that here against the Seahawks. So don't get me wrong, the offense played a big part in why the Chiefs won this one. But the main reason why Kansas City won this game, it was this side of the ball right here, as in the defensive side of the ball. The Seahawks only scored 13 points the entire game, and even that number is somewhat misleading, because in the fourth quarter, they scored a touchdown off an absurdly short field thanks to a Kansas City muff punt. The Chiefs' defense absolutely feasted on this day, holding the Seahawks to just 13 first downs. Kurt Warner had a 60-yard run to start the game off. Take that run out, and Warner, one of the best running backs in all of football, had just 33 rushing yards on 3 yards per carry, and he was stuffed multiple times at the goal line. And even on Warner's 60-yard run that eventually led to 3 points, there was a highly controversial ruling that was not even the slightest bit definitive on the replay that Warner stepped out of bounds before he fumbled the football. The fumble was recovered by Kansas City, and it easily could have been Chiefs' ball. Starting quarterback Jim Zorn, who was normally very good against Kansas City in the past, struggled mightily on this day, going 19 for 43, completing just 44% of his passes while throwing for under 200 net passing yards and throwing 2 interceptions, finishing the game with a passer rating of 47.2. Keep in mind that this was a Seahawks team that would eventually finish the season as the 6th best offense in all of football. This was a Seahawks offense that was incredibly tough to stop. And somehow, the Chiefs, as in a team that had one of the worst defenses in the NFL in 1982 post-strike, and a team that would have finished the 1983 season as one of the worst defenses in the league in points allowed, somehow held Seattle in check. It's as though the Chiefs knew the snap count. They were always off the ball quickly. It's as though the Chiefs knew exactly when the ball was going to be snapped and knew what was coming. It's as though the Chiefs somehow had information on Jim Zorn's snap count before the game, had snuck onto the field completely unauthorized to get this information, and were able to practice everything in advance, leaving them with no surprises for the game. That's how crazy this performance was.
Oh, yes, but that would be cheating.
Cheating!
Yep, because now we need to talk about Chiefs scout Greg Mons. Because, oh man, this was the lesser-known 1983 equivalent of a Spygate that you probably never heard of before now, and to some extent at least. Prior to this Chiefs-Seahawks game, where the Chiefs defense, as you can tell from all these highlights, absolutely dominated, the Seahawks had a preseason game against the San Francisco 49ers at Candlestick Park, and the Chiefs sent Mons over to scout the Seahawks for that game. This was one of the first assignments that Mons had not just with the Chiefs, but at the pro level. He had done some work in the college game as a coach, but he had never done any sort of scouting, let alone scouting at the pro level. Now, teams send advanced scouts to games all the time. It is incredibly common practice to have a guy on the team whose only job it is to scout future opponents so that you've got a head start in preparing. However, there are certain things that advanced scouts can and cannot do. There are certain areas of the stadium that they have to be confined to, usually the press box. And there are certain pieces of technology that they are barred from using. We saw a giant controversy with that in 2019 when the New England Patriots were scouting the Cincinnati Bengals. And Mons decided that it would be a good idea, in order to really get to know the Seahawks, to go out onto the field with a tape recorder and all, and get a good look at the team up close and in person. This is despite the fact that there is, quite literally, an NFL rule that prohibits scouts from going onto the field. If you are an advanced scout for a game, you have to stay in the press box. But Mons did not know that, because the press passes at Candlestick Park, oddly enough, didn't restrict him from being on the field. Usually, a press pass tells you exactly where you're allowed to be and where you can't be, and for whatever reason, the one in San Francisco omitted that information. Again, this guy was a newbie to the pro game, so he didn't know about this rule. And just to make sure that he wasn't doing anything illegal, he checked with multiple security guards at Candlestick Park to make sure that he was allowed on the field and was allowed into that area. And both of them, presumably not knowing the rule or who he was, allowed him to do it. So it's not as though Mons went undercover or snuck onto the field. He didn't see anything on his press pass that barred him access to the field. So he went on the field, just as he had done for the past decade when he was coaching in the college ranks. But in the NFL, as an advanced scout for a team that's not yours? Yeah, that's prohibited. The Seahawks were understandably fuming about this, and were fuming at the incompetence of the 49ers security officials. Eventually, Seahawks public relations director Gary Wright found out and demanded that Mons be removed from the field and stop scouting their offense, because he was obviously not supposed to be there. When Mons was asked to be removed from the field, he complied fully, and even offered to give the Seahawks the tape recorder that he had to show what exactly he got. But the damage had been done by that point, because Mons had Seattle's snap count. He knew exactly what cadence Jim Zorn used before calling plays, and could use that information to help the Chiefs time the snap better. Said Mons, "I heard the count and said into the tape recorder, sounds like set 364, 364, hut, hut, hut." The only recording on the tape was my voice. And this is an interesting one, because at no point in the recording could you hear Zorn's voice. All you heard was the voice of Mons mimicking the snap count, which is weird today and would seem like somewhat of a non-story in 2024, seeing as you can hear the snap count that quarterbacks use and mimic it on television. But 40 years ago? Yeah, this was a massive deal, and the Seahawks filed a formal complaint to the NFL and Commissioner Pete Rozelle about it. However, Mons was apologetic to some extent. While he said that he didn't understand what the big deal was, he made it extremely clear that he wasn't trying to break any rules here and thought that he was allowed to be on the field, especially since he did this in college and no one on the 49ers staff stopped him. Said Mons in preparing for the game that you've been watching this whole time, "I wasn't doing anything that I haven't always done in college. I've always gone down on the field. If I'd known I wasn't supposed to be on the field, I wouldn't have gone. I apologized to everyone. I really didn't get anything of significance. It's not like I was 2 feet away and actually picking up Zorn's voice on the cadence. I just spoke into the tape recorder and said that Seattle's cadence sounds like such and such. I got nothing of real value, but I told everyone I was sorry. I told them 2 or 3 times. It was just a mistake." In case you couldn't tell by now, Mons was acting entirely on his own accord. This was his idea and his alone. It's not like this was some grand plan by the Chiefs to cheat and break the rules. Mons thought that he was helping out his team, but in doing so, he gave them a ton of trouble. Still, the Chiefs did not punish Mons for this at all. They obviously let him know the rules prohibiting him from going on the field, but other than that, the Chiefs didn't fire him or suspend him or dock his pay or anything like that. Said General Manager Jim Schaff, "Mons was guilty of nothing more than exuberance in doing his job. Nothing evil." And Les Miller, the director of scouting for the Chiefs, said on Mons, "While it was not technically illegal with the past that he had, he understands that it was not the thing to do. He was just trying to do a thorough job for us." And the NFL seemed to agree, because even though the Seahawks sent a complaint after the game to the league, Pete Rozelle decided to do nothing. He did not punish the Chiefs. It's not as though Mons was part of a grand scheme with the Chiefs. He was entirely on his own. I guess you could say the Chiefs should have informed him of the rules, but you can't really blame a guy who's a newbie for going on the field and trying to scout that way when he thinks he's allowed to, because he did that in college, when his press pass didn't prohibit him from going on the field, when he even approached multiple security guards and both of them let him on the field, when he never tried to conceal his identity, and when, After being escorted off the field, not only did he comply, but he even offered to give all of his information to the Seahawks. Yes, he made a mistake, but it's almost like if you're a reporter who works for a newspaper that is banned from entering the locker room. It's your first day on the job. Your press pass says nothing about banning you from the locker room. You ask multiple security guards if you're allowed to be in there, and they say yes. And then, when you get kicked out, you offer to give up everything you have. I can't exactly blame the individual there, nor can I really blame the team all that much. And Roselle and the NFL felt the exact same way. What is funny about the game between these two teams behind me right here is that when the teams met later in the season in the rematch at the Kingdome, things were a lot different. Number one, the Seahawks had a new quarterback under center, as Jim Zorn had been benched for Dave Craig. Number two, the Chiefs couldn't do any advanced scouting on the field to pick up Dave Craig's snap count or cadence or anything like that. The end result? An absolute thriller for the ages, one of the greatest regular season games of all time, and a shootout that is still talked about 40 years later, as the Seahawks won the game in overtime, 51-48. Just a little bit different if I do say so myself. As for what happened for the rest of the season, the Chiefs would end the year with a 6-10 record, missing the playoffs for the 12th straight season, while the Seahawks would rebound from that Week 1 loss, would make it to the playoffs for the first time in franchise history, and would make it all the way to the AFC Championship. So the two teams went in complete opposite directions after Week 1. The Seahawks may have lost the battle after Week 1, but they won the rematch, and they definitely won the war. The Chiefs' defense played incredibly well during this game right here, but it raises the question if they got a fair amount of help to do it. Does knowing what the snap count is going to sound like matter? Is it a big deal? Is it a useful piece of information to have? Well, that's for you to decide and debate in the comments down below. But Mons lasted a fairly long time with the Chiefs before going to the Canadian Football League and being a head coach there in the late 90s with the BC Lions. So his football career was not hindered by this incident in the slightest bit. Still, this incident raises a valuable lesson about knowing the rules and getting permission from a higher up before acting on your own accord. Because sometimes there's a reason that certain things can't be done that you might not know about, as Mons found out the hard way during this game in 1983. Because in the eyes of the Seahawks, on this day in 1983, the Kansas City Chiefs were the Kansas City Chiefs. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.